Before the show starts, this is a reminder to all our listeners that the podcast is an open discussion forum and not meant to be used as a source of direct professional help. We at Panicstationsuk would always urge anybody listening to go seek advice from their GP, that is their doctor, a counsellor or a therapist. The podcast is, however, a place for people to share experiences and realise that you are not alone. Due to the subject matter discussed in the shows, some episodes may have explicit language in. I warn listeners, as this is meant to be a realistic look at mental health. As such, you may find that some of the guests use some pretty colourful language. I ask all listeners just to freely accept this and to honour the guests that are on the show. It's their journey and it's their freedom of speech, and we at Panic Stations UK would never do anything to discourage that. Many thanks and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Panic Stations UK. I'm your host Chris Jones, and as always we're keen to start the show. Just a few things before we start. At the time of recording this, the actor Robin Williams has sadly passed away. For all intents and purposes, he's taken his own life, and it's believed that this has been linked to depression, hence one of the reasons we had a special just a day after he passed away. Because of the sheer volume of episodes I've had to record this week, I do not know how far ahead in the future this episode will be played. Simply because we have a bunch of episodes that need to be shown first in the public domain, and obviously we try to be like a weekly show. Because otherwise there's so much that, you know, people would be like, there's too much to like listen to at the same time. So obviously we try to limit it. And one of the things I've learned is, because the show is so long, I need to start breaking it down a bit. So I try to now get it between anything between 40 minutes and an hour and 15, 20 minutes tops. So what I'm trying to do with today's episode, it'll probably get broken into two pieces. This will be part one, talking about bipolar. And we're very lucky to have Danny back with us on the show to discuss, obviously, the issues that he's come across before. Because obviously we spoke about anxiety and sleeplessness last time he was here. And this time we're obviously talking about a different set of circumstances altogether. And Danny, as I said before, has got a lot of experience, and it's a wealth of knowledge that I think we can all kind of learn a little bit more, enlighten ourselves a bit more about. So I'm very, very happy to have him on the show. And and welcome back, Danny. Here we go. How are you doing?
I'm good, actually. Surprisingly, considering the last few days. But I'm very good, and ready to start, if you are actually ready for this, because
I am ready. I'm absolutely ready, because this is going to be a big one.
Yes it is. Even fitting it into 2 episodes, I'm probably still going to have to shave some stuff.
Well, if we have to, this is potentially part one then. If we have to, we'll look at doing like 3 parts if we have to. So there we go. We'll see how it goes. We'll wing this one.
We wing them all.
We wing them all. There we go.
Right. Okay. So we should start off at the beginning, I suppose.
Start at the beginning. Best place to begin.
Yeah. With what on earth bipolar is.
Okay. You tell me, and the listeners. I think the best way to start is you tell us what you have gone through, and lead it up to bipolar. I think is the best way of going.
I should probably start almost work backwards to a degree. I was actually diagnosed with bipolar about 4 years ago now.
Okay.
Which would make me 29 at the time, 15 years after first getting the symptoms.
Wow.
And that's not unusual, which is really unfortunate. But I will explain why it's not unusual. It's not unusual because with me, as it is with a lot of other people, if you're showing symptoms of hypomania, you feel fantastic. So the last place you're going as a doctor to say, help me, I feel great. You don't go. So a lot of people potentially who are undiagnosed with bipolar disorder could be going to the doctor saying, I feel miserable or I feel depressed for X amount of time, and not reporting their hypomanic symptoms. Having said that, I did report them all the way through. But because I have a occurring disorder, which has a certain amount of overlap in the symptoms, it was too easy to confuse them. So it took a long time, and 4, maybe 5 different psychiatrists eventually to put everything together, because it's so difficult to unravel everything.
Okay.
But eventually I did get the right diagnosis, which for me was bipolar type 2, but with psychotic depression. I will explain all these terms a little bit more.
I was about to say, we'll definitely have to go into some of these terms. A lot of people will be like, what?
But I also have co-occurring borderline personality disorder, which, again, is another episode at some point way down the space-time continuum.
Yes.
But there are some overlapping symptoms, which is why it's so difficult. So from that, if I go back to when it first occurred, which was when I was 14, now, there are potentially some symptoms that occurred before then, but it's kind of difficult to say, yes, they were definitely telling symptoms. Because every child has their own little behavioural quirks and what have you. What I can say is that there were certain things such as every now and again, going back to being about the age of 6, I would have periods of about a week or so when I would sleep for 20 hours a day. So you could say that there were cyclic patterns to my energy levels. Possibly, if you wanted to. But most psychiatrists generally probably don't go back that far. My first major depressive period was, as I say, when I was about 14, and there were certain triggers to it coming out, and probably the 2 most important ones was being bullied at school, which is not unusual for a lot of people, unfortunately, and my parents' marriage crumbling at the same time. So there's no escape then when you think about it. School's crap, home life's crap, where are you going to go?
Yeah. Very common.
Absolutely. And it's also really common for a traumatic situation like that to precede a mental health issue coming out. I don't know why, but it seems to be a trigger for things like that to happen. So what happened was, over the space of probably only about 2 weeks, I went from being your typical moody teenager to being severely depressed. I had to stay off school for about 3 months or so. Nobody knew what was going on, because it seemed to come completely out of the blue. And I got a lot of the symptoms that you would expect with depression, so, sort of lethargy, losing interest in things, being tired all the time. But I would also have something called anhedonia, which is essentially it's a technical term which just means loss of pleasure. So if you imagine everything in your life that brings you an ounce of pleasure, if it suddenly stopped, if you can imagine that.
That I can imagine, because I said on an earlier episode, when one of the times I was at my lowest, the best way of describing it was when I was at my lowest. You get to a point that you have no empathy. Well, not empathy, but you have no feeling. It's just like you're apathetic. I think is the best word to use about anything. That's how I got. I got really like I had just the only feeling I would get was just feeling of despair. If when it did occur, and then nothing. Everything was just bland. There was no joy to be had at anything. Nothing that I usually love would like sort of impassion me. Yeah,
absolutely. What else I had was I would go into sort of what you might call depressive stupors for 3-4 hours at a time, which is basically just lying there completely unresponsive to anything around me because of the sheer weight of the despair. You didn't even have the will to move or talk or do anything. And then on top of that, probably one of the symptoms which was most telling that this wasn't a regular sort of depression was everything had a sense of unreality about it. This is something that they call derealization. And it sometimes happens with people if they've had a really severe trauma. So, for example, if they've been in a car crash, or if they've suddenly had the news that a loved one's passed away, and you get that feeling of this isn't real, this can't be real. And there was that sensation of there was like a blurring between the lines of reality almost.
You're saying about the derealization. just for our listeners out there, could you just explain to them what's that like? A, what that's like to go through, and B, like what it is in general.
Okay. It's a really, really difficult thing to explain.
A lot of it is. It's an emotion, feeling. Isn't it?
Yeah. If you can imagine the sense that you've woken up and your entire view of the world, all the houses around you and all the people around you have been replaced with film sets and actors. And there's just that inkling that it's not what it should be. It's not right. It's not the world that you know. There's something about it which is unreal or synthetic. And along with that, there's a sense that if you can just somehow punch through this fake reality or tear a hole in it, then on the other side, that's where reality really is. And it's a really just almost impossible thing to explain to somebody who hasn't experienced it. How it is.
It does happen, doesn't it? It does happen to people that suffer from depression as well.
Yeah, it certainly can do. And it can manifest in various different mental conditions. And as I say, it can happen to people in day-to-day life if they experience a trauma. It's almost like a defense mechanism of the mind of, this is so horrible, I can't cope with it, therefore I'm going to distance myself from it.
Like nothing's real. So it's like, it's kind of like, because I went through that, as you know, because I remember you telling me what it was many years ago when I had a breakdown, and I remember walking through town, and it's like you're not in your body. Your body's moving around.
Yeah,
you're not in your body, and nothing around you is real.
Yeah.
It's like almost being watching a TV show almost.
Sort of, yeah. You're describing actually two different things there. Derealization is that sense about the world around you. Depersonalization is that sense that you are watching your own actions as though they were on a movie theater or a cinema screen.
Oh, okay.
As if you're a voyeur on your own life. And that's kind of the distinction. One is internal and one is external. But there was depersonalization as well. And whereas most people might go through it in the event of a trauma, or for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was something that you used to get with your panic attacks. With me, this was pervasive for 3-4 months at a time.
Oh,
constant.
Yeah. Mine would come after having a panic attack. So again, after severe trauma.
Yeah.
So that it would come after a panic attack. For a couple of days after having the panic attack, it was like I wasn't even in my body. It was kind of like the aftershocks I would get after a really.
It's almost like a
bad panic
waking
attack.
daydream.
Yeah, that was it. That's exactly it. But then it would go. Thank God, it would go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
With me, it wouldn't. It would continue. It's almost as if somebody had flicked a switch and my mind had shut down. And along with that, there were what you could call cognitive impairment. So I couldn't write, I couldn't think. I could sort of understand what I wanted to say or what I wanted to write, but I couldn't make it happen. So if you give me a pen, I couldn't write with it. I couldn't form a sentence on the paper. It's like there was a block in place, or there was somehow no connection being made between the idea of what I wanted to do and actually making it happen. So there were all those symptoms, plus I was sleeping a lot more and eating a lot more, and that's one of the first differences that I'll talk about a lot more, but that's one of the more obvious differences between bipolar depression and what you call unipolar depression or depression. In that a lot of people say that when they're depressed, they can't sleep and they don't really want to eat, they lose their appetite. It's almost the opposite in a way with bipolar depression. It's almost like a hibernation state. You want to sleep all the time, and when you aren't sleeping, you want to eat. Now, I know that there are some exceptions out there to that. So before anybody writes in and tells me I don't know what I'm talking about, there are some exceptions, but this is just sort of the majority, so to speak. So after about 3 or 4 months, I sort of came out of it. It literally lifted, just like that. As quickly as it came, it went again.
And this is just before you're diagnosed with anything. This is the run up to it.
This was several years before I was diagnosed with anything.
Okay.
And in that period, I didn't even see a psychiatrist. The most I got was I should have got dragged along to see the school counsellor, who quote unquote told me I needed to make more friends.
What?
Yeah, that was it.
That's terrifying. Like, just to give a time scale here for the listeners. What period of time? What period would this been?
This would have been year-wise 1995. So yeah, it was sort of between about May and July of being about 14.
Okay, so you're 14.
Mm-hmm.
It's 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And a counsellor, because obviously the reason I say this is because it shows listeners out there that when it comes to the way our society has grown with awareness, we're still very much in the infant stages, and we are getting better, but it's a constant fight for those improvements.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on top of that, more importantly, it shows you how easy it was to slip through the cracks when you have a genuine issue.
Yeah.
And I mean,
it really did.
To turn around to somebody and say, just, get more friends is absolute nonsense.
It is. And unfortunately, it wasn't the first time that something like that was going to happen. It happened. That sort of brushing off happened quite a few times. So after that, somehow I managed to get through my GCSEs. I still didn't have the will to revise, so goodness knows how on earth I managed to get through those. And shortly after that, I actually went to my GP myself, and I said, look, this thing happened. I don't know what it was, because I hadn't taken it upon myself to educate myself or anything by that point. I was still completely shell-shocked and confused, as you would be. Sort of described described my symptoms, and they basically said, here you go, take these pills and go away.
Do you remember what you were? They just threw at you to have?
They are a drug called flupenthoxol, which I did some research on and found out is an atypical, not atypical, a space typical, one of the first generation of antipsychotic medications. Basically, you give them to people for hallucinations, delusions, schizophrenia, etc.
And would you have said at that time you were having schizophrenic delusions or schizophrenia delusions? You were seeing things, anything like that at that point?
No.
Right. So the doctor essentially just went, again, we're talking about education of stuff, and it's very important to point this out. They've just thrown pills at you back in 1995 or whatever, 96.
Take these and shut up and stop bothering me, basically.
That's absolute insanity. That's crazy.
So, started taking those, not knowing any better. And I didn't particularly feel any better because at this point, what happened is I sort of descended into what you might call a low-grade depression, sort of a chronic case of the blues, you know.
Was that like something would have generally have happened anyway, do you think? Or do you just, like, I'm not playing devil's advocate, or do you think it might have been something to do with the medication?
I think it was really just reactionary to the situation. It was what you might call a reactive depression of, I've just come out of school by this point. I'd enrolled at college before I knew what my school results were going to be, anticipating really bad results, as you wording it. I hadn't done a revision and what have you, so I'd enrolled on a course that was below the level that I was at. Found out my results, quit the college course thinking, well, I don't want to do that now. My parents' marriage had finally come to an end after about 10 years of slowly disintegrating. So I was just kind of floating and not really having any direction. And I think that is what caused that period of what you call mild depression. And these particular tablets, these fluphenthixol, they did nothing to alleviate that. So I'd gone back and basically said, these aren't really helping, and got a referral to a counsellor. And already by this point, I'd sort of not really got the best idea in my mind of how effective counsellors would be, because of course the only other one that I'd seen was the one in school. So I went along to this counsellor appointment, and the counsellor basically said, she'd asked the basic questions of, where do you want to go in life, this, that, and the other. And because I'd sort of been able to answer those, I kid you not when I say that at the end of that interview, she basically said, well, you don't seem that bad.
What?
Yeah, she basically said, there's not really anything that I can do for you. There's nothing really wrong with you.
And you explained all the way that you're feeling, the fact that a GP had put you on this medication, surely that would have been a flag to say there's an issue.
You would think so. But with the medication, one thing that is important to remember is that counsellors are not trained in medication. So I don't know if she fully grasped
the situation,
what that medication was for. And bearing in mind that at this point I wasn't appearing to be that bad, because of course bipolar is cyclic, and in between those mood cycles you can appear to be pretty normal. So what happened then is, for the next 4 years I entered quite a standard or predictable cyclic pattern. What happened was, between about April and October, I would be in a hypomanic state. I'll explain more as we go on what that means. But what that then made me do was I would enroll for college. I would get to college and coast along at A-levels. I don't know what the American equivalent is to explain that.
I think the best way to describe it is, in the UK, it's changing now that you have to be either in an apprenticeship at the age of 16 or in college. It's one or the other. You still have to be in education until you're 18. In America, and other countries, I know that it's classed as you're there till you do high school, till like 18, 19 or whatever, and then you go to university. That's what my belief is. So essentially, it's like being in high school and doing your exams in high school, getting ready to go to university. That kind of equivalent.
So. I'm not really sure where the crossover lies. It's all very confusing.
Yeah, it's a tiered educational system.
Yeah. So anyway, I would be in college for those few months, and I would be coasting along, turning in essays at 98 and 99%, come back straight A's, fine, and then, as before, it would take maybe a week or two, and I go from that to not being able to write my own name. The shutters came down, and that was it, and I would have to leave. There was no way I could continue because I physically and mentally could not continue the work. And so that would sort of continue until the following sort of March, April, when it would lift, and I would swing back the other way and then enroll again. And that happened for about 4 years constantly. During this period of 4 years, the depressions became more severe, and there were, and that's when sort of the psychotic symptoms started to appear. Psychotic depression, trying to explain it is very difficult. If somebody has never had a hallucination, trying to explain a hallucination to somebody is very, very hard to do. But some of the things that I would see and hear is I've looked at a wall and seen faces appearing from the walls. There's been times when I've been in my room trying to get to sleep at night, and I would hear screaming coming from outside. Is somebody who's been raped, murdered, whatever? Nobody there.
Oh my
God. Paranoia, severe paranoia. When paranoia goes to the nth degree, and you firmly believe that somebody is either talking about you behind your back, or they're out to get you, or what have you, it becomes a psychosis. Because you can't talk yourself out of it. It's not, I think somebody's talking about me behind my back. They are. And you will misinterpret things around you based upon that firm belief. So I would believe that that the college was plotting against me. That they would set me up to fail. And what would also happen is I would get something that they call Cotard's delusion. It's named after the person that first discovered it. It was a French psychiatrist. I can't remember his first name, but his surname was Cotard. And what it does is it takes that numb feeling that we discussed sort of to the nth degree. If you think about it, if you get so numb, it's almost like a living death. With Cotard's delusion, you start to believe that you have actually already died.
And this was at college?
This was during the depressive periods when I couldn't be in college.
Okay.
Because I couldn't function.
But it's the college years, as it were?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, are you still taking the medication this doctor's prescribed? Or
I stopped that particular medication. In the interim, I had been on various different medications, just to trot some of them out. Haldol, which was one of the first antipsychotic medications, goes back to the 50s, I think. Chlorpromazine, which you might know under the more popular name of Thorazine,
right?
Which is, again, goes back to the 1950s. Some people do well on them. I say I was given them because they're old, therefore they're cheap.
Right. It's sort of like, rather than the educational sort of theories behind depression, mm-hmm. and what might work for the symptoms that you were having, because obviously we've talked before, just on a very, very quick segue. I don't want to interrupt the flow too much. We've talked in the past on various shows, like our guests have touched upon medication. I'm a big believer personally, and this is my own personal view, that there is a definite need for medication, and obviously that's when it's diagnosed by the correct individuals.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that now when you get a diagnosis, you're going to be given all this stuff. We're talking 15 years ago, kids, so it's like a big difference between 15 years and now. That said, it shows you the need for why we need to constantly keep pushing the boundaries for these kind of things.
Absolutely, it does. And with hindsight, my doctors were rubbish. And what I should have done is I should have stood up for myself, and that's something that I learned to do over time. At the time, obviously, when you're in the middle of this maelstrom, all you're thinking of, just make it stop somehow. Just give me something that's going to make it stop. So there were those two antipsychotics. There were also a couple of different antidepressants. I believe there's one called lofapramine or lofapramine, however you want to pronounce it, and paroxetine, which is one of the SSRIs. It's in the same category as things like Prozac and citalopram.
Okay. Sorry, can you just tell the listeners what an SSRI is?
An SSRI is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor.
And that's to increase. Now, for people who don't know, serotonin's the thing that obviously the stabilizing chemical in your brain, isn't it?
It affects your mood. It's what's known as a neurotransmitter.
That's the one.
And basically, how these things work is they attach to the parts of the brain which reabsorb excess serotonin, working on the belief, I assume, that if you're depressed, if you stop excess serotonin from being reabsorbed into the brain, then there's more free serotonin roaming around in your brain and more that you can then utilize, which will then raise your mood.
There we go.
Yep. And for those people in America who I think go by a brand name, that brand name would be Paxil. Paroxetine, Paxil, same thing. Bit of a bad reputation between you and me.
Okay.
For things like getting off it. Some people consider it to be quite addictive.
Well, I from my own personal thing, because you mentioned the medication I'm on, citalopram. I'm fortunate enough to be on a low dose. I say fortunate because it means I don't need to be on heavier stuff. So I'm one of the lucky ones in the respects of people who have to suffer and have to go through really high dosage of SSRIs and other medications to alleviate symptoms that they go through. Now, the worst thing, I've been on and off citalopram for around about 4 years now. And the problem is, the longer you stay on them, because they're not meant to be there for forever, the longer you stay on them, the harder it is to get off them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've had symptoms when I've had moments where I've come off them. Good God, and even on a low dose, it can be nightmarish.
It can be, yeah. In fact, to quote a psychiatrist who has a YouTube channel that I regularly watch, he said that if you need to be on a specific antidepressant for more than 18 months, then you need to have it reviewed as to whether or not it's doing its job properly. Because they're not designed for you to be on them for that length of time, really.
I personally think for the longest time, the reason I'm still on mine, and this might be the case for the listeners, I personally think I'm using them as a crutch. And if I'm not, they've become this, it's almost, I won't say placebo, because my body is now used to having those things. So if I went off them, I'd probably be like having an issue probably for quite a while, for a few months, and then it'll eventually stabilise out.
I think there's definitely the issue of psychological dependence.
And I think mine has got to the point where it's more psychological dependence.
Yeah, it could well be.
Sorry, please continue. You're talking about the...
Right, where was I? So yes, Cotard's delusion.
Yes.
Now, there are lots of different ways that it can manifest. Some people have the sense that one of their limbs has died. You know, they might be completely convinced that their arm has rotted away. And they will see it, and they will smell it, and they won't be able to feel anything. And this is how real hallucinations are. The way it manifested with me is I was convinced that I was dead, I was in purgatory, and the God that I don't even believe in was watching me to decide which way I was going to go.
Wow. How long did this go on for?
The longest that this delusion lasted for me was about 9 months.
9 months of feeling that way?
Mm-hmm.
9 months of being utterly convinced you're dead?
Yep.
Did you tell anybody while this was going on?
No. I honestly didn't, because as far as I was concerned, everybody around me was just sort of players in this elaborate setup in which I was sort of the star player.
Wow.
And you know, by the end of it, at some point, I was either going to end up in heaven or end up in hell, depending on how I acted.
With the people around you
Yeah.
there and then, because it was like this big test.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God. So the delusion had gone, because it is a delusion in itself, isn't it? It had gone to such an extreme that you felt that if you were to mention any of this, it would affect the outcome of what you believed was going to happen.
Absolutely.
So obviously you were in a situation where if you'd have told the doctor, obviously that might have been different. It might have been a whole different, if it's a psychiatrist or a doctor, it might have been a whole different
it could have been. Yeah.
Wow.
Could have been, but yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah.
You get to 9 months of this.
Yeah.
What happens next?
Well, during that 4-year period with these cycles, there were either 3 or 4 attempted suicides through overdose. These were taking the antidepressants that I got. Bearing in mind that whenever I got given a new medication, the doctors really didn't do what they should have done, given the severity of my condition. I was never told to get rid of the old medications. Wasn't basically told, go to your chemist and give them these other medications that you've got.
So you just had all these different antipsychotics and God knows what in your house?
Yeah, absolutely. I had the 2 different antidepressants that I've mentioned. I had Haldol still. I had Thorazine or chlorpromazine, however you want to pronounce it. I also had diazepam. I had temazepam. I had zopiclone. All of those are sort of sleeping tablets.
I've been on Zopiclone before when I've had sleeping issues. They give you a very small amount because of how addictive they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And by this point, I'd been given a newer antidepressant called Effexor, or venlafaxine, which is quite a recent addition to the antidepressant arsenal, so to speak. So I had all these different medications. And basically, I believe, understandably, it's quite hazy, some of the information around this time.
Well, yeah.
But I remember at least one time when I took a cocktail of diazepam and zopiclone and thorazine, and probably in the region of about 20 or 30 each. Managed to buy myself a few days in hospital with that.
Oh my God.
And yet still, what would happen is, I would get assessed by the mental health practitioner at the hospital, who, at least on that occasion, basically said, well, we're not going to give you more than 7 days worth of medication at a time, off you go.
So every week you'd only get 7 days worth of...
Yeah. Now, the problem with that was I was so inconsistent that I would regularly go off my medication. Because if you can imagine, if you're so depressed, if you're depressed to the point where you think you're actually dead, keeping up with going and getting a prescription every week is really tough.
Yeah, cool.
And I didn't really have much of a support network around me to help. You know, I had my best friend whose solution was, "You're depressed, let's go and get pissed."
Okay, so again, self-medication, not the wisest thing to do when you're on God knows what.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, I was regularly smoking a lot of marijuana for the same reason, that it would just give some relief from this constant sense of misery, I suppose. Although looking back, there is that connection between psychosis and marijuana. If you have that potential, I'm not saying marijuana causes it, because studies have proved that it probably doesn't. But if you have that seed in you or that potential for it, yes, it can bring it out. So there's every chance that I was making myself a lot worse. And around that same time, between sort of 1923, was when I had a lot of periods of self-harm as well, which was for a number of reasons. Now, what we might want to do is do self-harm at a future point.
Yeah. If I may, I think if we just touch upon it very slightly in the context of what it's, because it's all leading up to the whole bipolar thing anyway.
Yeah.
So if we touch upon it, and obviously we'll do another episode, because I think you're right.
Yep.
Self-harm is an entire series of episodes by themselves. But I think for the context of what you're trying to explain to the listeners, I think it's definitely a good idea to kind of explain just a little bit, just like a fraction of what was going on at the time. Again, just to go back for time frame, and I don't mean to keep interrupting you, so please forgive me, and I'm sorry if it's irritating the listeners. The reason I'm doing it is obviously to give a bit more context for things.
Sure.
Right, so we've got your teenage years at school, this undiagnosed conditions that you're having, and these feelings of dread and everything else, and all the things that are going on in your home life. By the time that you are given something, the doctor just basically doesn't fully listen and understand to the exact set of circumstances of what was going on in your teenage life at the moment.
That's true.
And again, to remind the listeners, you're 33.
I am.
Yeah, you're the same age as me. Like I'm a bit older by about 4 months, aren't I?
Give or take,
yeah. And basically, with that means obviously this is doctors 15 years old ago, 16 years ago, and the rest. Get your maths right, Chris. Sorry. So anyway, so you have that. Then you go to college. You have these periods where you're doing absolutely fantastic, kicking out straight A's with all your stuff. Then you have moments where you can't even be bothered to do stuff. You can't even write your name, and you're just like, you can't function properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's with the cognitive problems. It's almost not even a question of apathy. It's literally, as much as I wanted to, I just couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it's almost like there's an invisible block there. So I wanted to do them. I wanted to be able to carry on. Wanted to be able to write, but somehow I couldn't seem to do it.
Let me rephrase that then, because bad choice of words on my part then. So it's not a case of not being bothered. It's the fact that you can't function. Yeah. So you have that. Now, this goes on for your college years. So I'm assuming, 16 to 18, 19?
It was 16 to 23.
So were you going in and out of college during this period? Like stopping and starting? So you would start college, then you'd drop out of college, or you wouldn't finish the year, and then you'd restart the same subjects? What would happen?
I would restart the same subjects every year, and every year have to drop out by latest about November.
Okay. So really, you'd only be at college for a couple of months, and then you'd come back out. Yeah. Was it this? And you said again. Sorry, you said the same subjects, or?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally I would change them depending on a whim, really. But in general, it was A-level subjects, usually around sort of psychology, sociology, biology, that sort of area.
Just as an offshoot question, did you have some of the same teachers?
Yeah, the psychology tutors, the sociology tutors, they were the same every single year.
Now, I know that some people listening might be going, where are you going with this? And other people might be going, actually, hang on a second, why didn't they pick up on the fact that you were constantly doing this?
I have no idea. Especially given that abnormal, in inverted commas, abnormal psychology is taught at A-level.
So yeah, this is what I mean. If you're going to this is where I'm a bit of a loss here, because obviously you've got a psychology tutor who's witnessing a student coming back over and over again every year and repeating these cycles, starting off fantastically, then just pulling out, and never once going, maybe I should talk to somebody. Because I know when I was at college, when I was basically, I'd been kicked out by my mum.
Yeah.
So I was at college and I was living in a friend's house at the time, and I got low. But again, that's reactive depression because of the situation. I wasn't getting depressed to the point where I needed medication, but I was low and I was a bit down and things. But I had a tutor who would notice these things, and now and again she'd take time to talk to me and go, wow, and just listen, which really helped. Fantastic tutor she was. Her name was Sam, and she was absolutely fantastic, and she really helped. Now, again, the subject I was doing wasn't psychology, so it begs the question, why didn't they help? So I'm sure a lot of people will be thinking that that's all.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. The only thing I can think is that this particular psychology tutor was generally quite distant from her pupils. She was there to do a job and that was it.
Right, okay. Yeah. So kind of a bit unfazed, got to that point in her career where she's just kind of like nonchalant to things.
Yeah, okay. Almost. But at no point did a tutor come up to me and say, look, we think you've got some issues going on here. Maybe we should at least, let you see the college counsellor or psychologist, or try and do something because we can see that these patterns are occurring. Bearing in mind that I was completely oblivious to these patterns. It's like you can't see the wood for the trees when you're in the middle of it.
Well, yeah, because you're the one going through it.
Precisely.
But there are people who can, for the casual observer watching this kind of behaviour, it definitely does beg the question.
Absolutely. But no help was forthcoming at all.
So this is between the ages of 18 and 23, you were saying, or 19 and 23?
The colleges themselves were sort of 16 to 23.
Okay.
But 18 to 23 were the most intense and unstable years for the bipolar.
Okay. Right. And you were about to start talking about, you touched upon the fact that you had attempted to commit suicide.
Yes. Okay. 3 overdoses and 1 slashing of the wrist.
Okay. And again, the only way they decided to kind of look at how you were doing, with your behaviours and trying to regulate it was to put you on a weekly dose of medication.
Yeah, that was their way to remedy these overdoses. It wasn't to say, well, clearly we need to admit you and really have a thorough investigation on what's going on here. What I found was not just the mental health team in the hospital, but also with my GP. Now, bearing in mind that I can't be too harsh on GPs because they are not trained in psychiatry. So we have to remember that psychiatry is quite a specialised area, so I can't be too harsh on them.
Yeah, there's the argument that it's the mental and then obviously the physical. Now, obviously, as our perceptions of mental health have changed over the years, people are starting to notice, obviously, and quite rightly, it is connected. Yes, it's a specialist subject, like anything. Like if you're a foot doctor, you're going to know loads about feet, but you might not know anything about hands, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's all, they've done a lot of tests saying, look, it is all connected, like your physical and mental health, which, you get physical symptoms like you were saying before, where you see an arm and it's not working anymore and all this kind of stuff, and where you feel like you're convinced that it's rotten off and things.
Yeah, absolutely. Plus, I mean, they do say these days with a lot of the tests that there are, with certain psychological issues, there are clear abnormalities in the brain, bipolar being one of them. With CAT scans, there are clear differences in, for example, my brain to your brain.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that what they call biochemical issue. But we have to remember that kind of a GP is kind of in the medical profession is kind of a jack of all trades. They've got X number of training, but in certain areas, they really need to refer to a specialist that knows precisely what they were doing. But my point was that generally with the medical profession, they were really just treating the symptoms almost in a topical way, rather than trying to get to the root of what was causing the symptoms.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, in this 4-year period, there was a lot of self-harm that went on. Now, part of that was to do with borderline personality disorder, because self-harm is actually a symptom that you have to get a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. It's one of the core symptoms of it. But in terms of the bipolar, what it would do is it would kind of act as a way to shock myself out of this numb feeling. If you can imagine, in my mind, I was so numb that sensation of pain and blood suddenly, it was like an electric shock that jolted me back to reality for a short while. And granted, it was not a proactive thing to do. I completely agree that it's not a good way to treat depression, and I certainly don't advocate it. But that's what I did. Yeah, it's there. It happened, and it happened to the nth degree. Really, I mean, at the moment, last time I checked, I had in the region of 500 self-inflicted scars from that period. And it intensified to the point at which I believe it was sort of 2002, give or take, when in the space of 3 months I had 17 trips to the emergency room, or accident emergency, whatever you want to call it, for self-inflicted wounds, and still no admittance to a ward. The closest that I ever got was during one of those times going to the hospital, when I was seeing the mental health nurse on call, which is basically what you get if you end up in A&E with something like that, after you've sat and waited for however long, I don't know if it's the same in the American hospitals, but anybody who's been to A&E over here knows that it's a waiting game, really.
Yeah, definitely.
When eventually you did get to see a mental health nurse, I sat them down and said, look, I need to be admitted. I don't know what's going on here. I'm completely out of control. Something's going on, and if you don't do something about it, it's going to kill me. And I was basically told, well, the nearest bed's in Durham, take it or leave it. Bearing in mind that I used to live nowhere near Durham at all. But that was it. There was just no beds.
And what age are you at this point?
I would be about 22, 21, 22, on the cusp.
And this is after everything they have seen.
Yeah.
The attempts on your own life.
Mm-hmm.
The cuts across your body that you'd done.
Yep.
The fact that you weren't functioning, and the fact that your medical history would have shown you'd been on God knows how many different medications at this point.
Yeah. And I can't blame the mental health staff for that. But the fact of the matter is that I don't know if it's any better these days, but at that point, the facilities to deal with mental health crisis patients were, in a word, shit. There were very few, ways to deal with somebody if you were having an absolute crisis, which obviously at the time I was. Yeah, but there was simply not the facilities available to deal with it. So even after that time, when I went in and said, you need to do something, otherwise this is going to kill me, I was still let go. Yeah. Believe it or not.
It's... just at risk of saying something really ridiculous phrasing, mind-boggling.
Yeah.
That I cannot believe.
Well, yeah.
Well, I can believe. I can believe my own personal experiences with certain mental health crisis teams and things in my own past, but I can't believe. At the same time, you can't believe, because it just seems. It's almost like walking into this is the best kind of analogy I can think of. Mm-hmm. It's almost like somebody walking into a police station with a knife
Mm-hmm.
and having blood all over you and going, I've just killed somebody, and them going, yeah, we'll see about it in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah.
Don't you worry
Or,
about
or
it.
just sort of going, well, full up, sorry.
Yeah, like, and I'm going to kill somebody again. Yeah, well, if you just pop back in, we'll get an officer to come down to you, do a diary appointment or something.
Yeah.
We'll come and see you in about 15 hours time or 20 hours
and
time.
it's all down to the funding. They just there was no funding, there was no facilities. So it sort of carried on, and now we're sort of getting into 2004, when there was one particular incident which really changed everything. And what happened was, I'd just been paid. At this point, I was receiving disability living allowance. Still hadn't got a proper diagnosis of bipolar.
So no, there's been no proper psychological review?
There have been a psychological review by a psychiatrist who had said that he suspected borderline personality disorder. There was no point when I sat down and said, this is what we think it is. This is what you probably have. I basically had to try and wrench that information out of them, because there was no two-way street. There was no information being given back to me at this point. So I'd been paid. I went into my local town, did a bit of shopping or what have you, went into a local bar, got plastered. I must have had 7 or 8 pints of whatever it was. God only knows. Not sherry, but beer. And at some point, I bought the sort of old-fashioned double-edged razor blades, the thick ones. The thought that I mean.
Yeah, I know.
So while still drunk, I found what you might call a copse or a thicket or something. It was sort of on the outskirts of the town. Sat down and effectively butchered my left wrist. And
So you went to a field and basically...
Yeah, and when I say butchered, I mean the tendon was cut in half, the artery was sliced halfway through, the nerves, 30% of them were severed, damaged beyond all recognition. And then I sort of staggered to a hospital. I honestly don't know why. I do not know what was going on in my mind. I was so far gone at this point that logic and reason was beyond me. I couldn't say if that was definitely a suicide attempt, but it seems like a heck of a serious injury for just self-harm.
Yeah.
And so I got to A&E and basically got whisked off into a side room, because I was literally, the blood was running out of me. It wasn't dripping, it was just a constant stream. And they sort of tried to patch me up as best they could there before sending me down to a ward to await transfer to for surgery, because that's what it took. And there was one point where they were trying to patch me up, and they bent my wrist, and it was kind of like you see in the movies. There was literally a 6-foot jet of blood that went across the room.
Oh my God!
And it gives you an idea of where my mind was, because I was sat there laughing at them. I do not understand. It seems completely foreign to me these days, but there we go. So I got sent down to a ward to await transfer, which is going to be in the morning. And I said at the time, do you mind if I nip outside for a cigarette? And you would think, given the circumstance of the admission, most of the nurses would say, no, you're not going anywhere. But they didn't, so I went, had my cigarette, called a taxi, and went home.
And this is after the surgery?
No, this is before this. This is just with a bandage on this wrist, which was basically mincemeat.
So they'd done a patch-up job, and they knew that you had to go into to wait just enough to get you through till you could get to surgery.
Yeah. So I walked in to my house where my mum and my then boyfriend were living, and I got a long sort of woolen coat on me, which was actually mine. I hadn't stolen it from the hospital or anything. It was what I had gone in with. I And I remember that I got my arm bent and up against my chest. And as I got through the door, I lowered my arm, and literally it was just like somebody had dropped a bag of blood on the floor. It was just boom, it splattered all over the place. And safe to say, I got whisked straight back to the hospital as soon as they found out what had gone on. And they managed to keep me in there. And then the next day I was transferred to a surgical hospital in Sheffield, where I basically had to have reconstructive surgery on my wrist. And then I had to actually learn how to use my hand again. Had to wait for the nerves to start to work again, and then figure out how to will my hand to move, and then how to coordinate it, and this, that, and the other. And it was really during that recovery where I thought to myself, I have to do something, otherwise I'm not going to make it to 30 at this rate, because it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And if this call it a suicide attempt, because I can't think of what else to call it given the severity of it. If this is a sign of things to come, if this is going to get worse, then I'm going to end up dead. Simple as that. So basically, I went back to my GP, because even at the hospital, the surgical hospital had not scheduled a follow-up psychiatric appointment.
What?
Yeah. It's almost as if the two hospitals had not communicated. I'd been sent to this other hospital. They'd done the surgery, and after a couple of days, had sent me home.
That's like a massive lack of communication, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a huge amount of lack of communication.
So I took it upon myself. I went back to my GP. I said, look through my history. You can see as well as I can see that there is something going on here that is not being dealt with. You give me a psychiatric referral, and I want it urgently, because I'm not going to make it otherwise. It's that simple. So I managed to get the psychiatric referral, and from there I began to stand up for myself. And if a medication wasn't working, I would say, this isn't working, or this is giving me bad side effects, get it changed, do it. And I would start to educate myself and start to talk to them in their lingo, which seemed to almost shock them into doing something, because I wasn't sitting there as a passive partner. I would go in and, if there were side effects, I would go in and use the technical medical lingo at them to make them realise that I meant business, basically. And that I wasn't going to be fobbed off with any old medication, and I wasn't going to be messed about with anymore, because as far as I was concerned, it was life or death. If I didn't get sorted out, I was going to die, and that was it.
We're going to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
Because we're hitting the hour mark. So
Yep.
This is what we were saying before. We're going to cut these episodes into pieces here.
Mm-hmm.
So we can...
I did say it was going to be a bumpy ride.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's a great place to stop. And I'm really sorry, listeners. You're going to have to wait till next week to find out the more of the conversation here. But it's this.
We
I
should
think
start the EastEnders theme tune at this point, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, with the greatest respect, I think that's a great place to to end part one, with the fact that you've come out of this, you've gone through the ride, and there's still more of the ride to go. Of course, there is. But you've got to a point where you're standing up for yourself, and I think that's a very, very important thing for listeners to understand. If you feel any of these things, it's you go to a GP and you stand your ground. You say, look, this is what the hell is going on.
Yeah,
because you need to make them understand how serious it is.
And nobody knows your own mind, your own body better than you do. And sometimes you do have to, sit your doctor down and say, I'm sorry, I'm not having it.
I'm absolutely amazed with the plethora of information that you had there, like where you're going, well, I've done this, I've had to have surgery on my wrist, I've done several suicide attempts and with the medication, and just it goes to show you, again, I've said several times through this episode so far, it shows you the massive differences in the way that psychology and mental health issues are being dealt with in the UK now in 2014 compared to they were, well, now I was saying 15 years, almost 20 years ago, like 95, and then still the difference, 2004, so 10 years ago, even going back 10 years ago, there's a massive difference, like, when you, because 2004, I'm right in saying that's when you had to go into surgery and everything else.
Yes, it is.
So there's a massive difference there and then with the way things are perceived and challenged and dealt with. And again, like I keep saying, and like Danny said as well, this is exactly why we need to extend and educate people about what the hell mental health is all about and the kind of things that are going on.
It's also the reason that I'm very matter of fact about the whole thing. If I choose to hide it and not say anything about it, then nobody else gets a benefit from the things that I've been through.
Well, I know that all the listeners out there, I've said it before and I'll say it again, you're an incredibly brave man. You're an inspirational man, Danny, to be honest, to come forward after all the stuff you've had to go through and to be so candid and honest and to share this information to people takes true courage, because a lot of people would be like, oh, I'm not going to say that. What if? It takes balls to do that, and I'm really, really impressed. I respect the hell out of you for it, and I'm sure all the listeners respect you for that. And we're going to be back in part 2, and we're going to start talking about what happened to Danny afterwards when he started to stand his ground with the doctors more, and we're going to sort of go into that a bit more.
Yep, absolutely.
So until next week, this is Chris and Danny saying have a fantastic week, be safe, and you're not alone, and all the best. Take care now.
Wake up, dry your eyes, time to face a long night with a brave smile. Dive headfirst into the dark with your shaking hands clenched in a soldier's heart. I know where you've been, I know where you've been. You're not alone in this swirling world. You have my hand, you have my hand. Wake up, dry your eyes, time to face a long night with a brave smile. Dive headfirst into the dark with your shaking hands clenched in a soldier's heart. I know where you've been, I know where you've been. You're not alone in this swirling world. You have my hand, you have my hand, you have my hand.